meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. By the late 1890s, many militaries from various nations were expressing interest in cars. By 1902, several cars had been built to military specifications for testing by assorted interested armies. Yet these first armored and armed cars did not see actual battle. The first car to see actual use on the battlefield during war was not an armored car. It was just a car that was in the right place at the right time. And today, we'll tell the tale of the first car to actually be used in battle. At the turn of the 20th century, Japan had a robust bicycle industry, and like most bicycle makers, many of these Japanese companies were interested in making cars. One of them was the Soren Shokai Bicycle Company, and in 1902, one of their managers, Shinichiro Yoshida, visited the United States and brought back with him a 12-horsepower single-cylinder engine and transmission from a Packard Model C. He handed this to a young engineer, a certain Komanosuke Uchiyama, who then built a chassis and body to put the engine into. And thus, the first gas-powered car to be built in Japan was produced. The Imperial Japanese Army took notice of this car, and a rather prominent general, Tatsumi Naofumi, decided to requisition the car, to run it through some trials and see if such a thing could be useful to the Japanese army. He did not have much time. Tensions between Russia and Japan were growing, and by February of 1904, the two nations were at war. Japan would win the war in the fall of the following year, and the Japanese Imperial fleet devastated the Russian Navy in a number of very decisive battles, one of which did involve a certain Russian vessel that was the bane of many binoculars. But during this war, there was one particular land battle which took place in February and March of 1905 that was quite historic for a number of reasons. The Battle of Mukden. The battle lasted for almost 3 weeks, from February 20th to March 10th of 1905, and was, up to that point, the largest land engagement in modern history, involving over 600 men, both sides combined. The Russian forces occupied the city of Mukden, which is modern Shenyang, and were well dug in and prepared to put up a strong defense. The Japanese approached from the south, intending to break through the defenses and take the city. In overall command of the Russian forces was General Kuropatkin, who directed the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Russian Manchurian armies. The three armies were in position south of the city along a 90-mile front. General Nikolai Lenovich led the 1st Army, holding the east flank. The 2nd, under General Baron von Kaulbars, held the western flank, and General Baron von Bilderling held the center. The Russians had good positions, had a numerical advantage over the Japanese, and also had far more artillery pieces and supplies than their enemies. And since Mukden was a main connection for their then still under construction Trans-Siberian Railroad, they had no interest at all in retreating. For the Japanese, General Oyama Iwao was in overall command of the 4 Japanese Manchurian armies, with Tatsumi Naofumi as his chief of staff. General Kuryoki led the 1st Army attacking the Russian center. General Oku commanded the 2nd Army on their western flank. General Nogi was running the 3rd Army in reserve behind Oku, and General Nozu was on the east with the 4th Army, intent to cut off the rail line. There was an additional Japanese force, the Yalu River Army, which was not under direct command of General Oyama, but was still a thorn in the side for the Russian eastern flank. Now, Kuropatkin was expecting the Japanese to focus their attacks on the eastern flank for a couple of reasons. It was where the rail line was most vulnerable, and the landscape in that area was very hilly, and the Japanese were known for being adept at fighting in that kind of terrain. And for the first 2 weeks of the battle, Japanese did much focus and energy on the eastern and central Russian positions, but did not advance far. It was at this point on March 6th that General Oyama had an idea. Have General Nogi's Third Army march around the Russian western flank and attempt an encirclement. And so he told his chief of staff to send the order. And so General Naofumi instructed his aide to take the car across the battlefield to General Nogi and deliver them. And so, on March 6th, 1905, a car was driven across the battlefield under fire to give those orders. Successfully delivered, Nogi took his army around the Russian flank, which confounded them. The Russians had to shore up that flank, but in the process, they didn't do a good job of maintaining other positions and opened a major gap in the center. Oyama took advantage of this, and by the following day, the Russian 1st and 3rd Manchurian armies were fleeing in chaos. Routed and with most of their artillery and supplies now in enemy hands, Kuropatkin withdrew, and the Japanese concluded the battle by March 10th, having taken the city and thus denied the Trans-Siberian Railway to the Russians. Both armies were exhausted after the battle, but the Japanese were victorious. And for the first time in history, a car played a small but still important part in that battle, making the car built by Komanosuke Uchiyama the first car to serve in actual battle. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.